You're listening to Big World Network.
Bloodshot Buck, Season 2, Episode 1. Written by W.H. Wood and Mitch K. Allan. Read by Willow Wood. Ava stood rooted to the spot, staring at the projection cast onto the blast shield. Justicat Azuma paced behind her, also watching the screen. She had figured out by now that Azuma was relaying bird's-eye instructions to the backup Justicat team making their way to the scene. The remaining surplus of security filled the lobby, all watching, muttering, waiting. Officers of non-synth divisions argued with high-ranking Justicats about negligence and responsibility. Who was to blame? Why hadn't the Justicats stopped that woman yet? Ava clenched her fists around her belt loops and tried to process the footage of Neni tearing across the docking bay. Her form rippled and stretched like a molten shadow. The off-white colouring of the projection turned the entire event into a horror show. That liquid creature was not NENI-LOHI. On screen, one of the justices crumpled, blood pouring out of him like a waterfall. The lobby gasped and shrieked, and Ava clutched her stomach, sickened. It wasn't until Neni remorphed from the puddle on the floor that Ava realised what was happening. Somehow, Neni had murdered that man, and now held his blood in the air. "Move!" bellowed the High Justice, decorated in his fantastic armour. The audience parted at his command, and the elite Catharian charged out of the room.
"Stall her! Don't let leave! Where is Sato?"
How could Neni do this? Ava wanted to run up there and smack her hard. What the hell was she doing? Ava trembled from head to foot as she overheard whispers from nearby security. He'll still be alive. He's in that blood. She's torturing him. Ava shivered harder, studying the distance between Neni and the escape shuttle. If they just let her go, things might not escalate. Get on the ship. If the High Justice intervened, Ava saw no way he'd stop her without it getting messy. He'd tear Neni apart and throw her across the frigates. Ava gripped her stomach with both hands now. Blood thudded inside her ears and behind her eyes. A coldness blanketed her body. A deathly cold, so much worse than any high fever she'd ever endured. Her eyesight blurred and watered, but she made herself watch. "Azuma," she whispered. He didn't notice. "Sir?" Neni threw what was left of the justice across the floor. An uproar broke out from the security teams around Ava. "No, no, no!" Before she could buckle to her knees, a fierce hand gripped Ava's arm and hauled her through the seething audience. She stumbled along, recognizing Azuma's blurry outline. He dragged her out of the lobby, down a corridor and away from the noise, pulling her through an official black door. Another corridor, but narrow and unpainted. The white walls had no labels or symbols to indicate where they were. Azuma marched on, and Ava groaned, shying away from the lights flickering on overhead. At the end of the hall, Azuma opened another black door and pushed her inside. Oh no. She knew this setup. Ava didn't have to watch vid shows to know that an isolated room with one table and 2 chairs meant serious shit. Azuma sat her down, and Ava did her best not to fold forward like a paper doll. Vomit swirled in her stomach.
"Do not move,"
he said, and left. As soon as the door shut, Ava dived for the bin in the corner and shoved her face inside. She retched up very little and hated herself for freaking out. "I'm a Marine. I got this far. I will not go down for this. Back in her chair and feeling less like an icicle, Ava fought to control her shakes. She was fine. She had nothing to do with this. Her inquisitors would figure that out soon enough. By the time Justicatara swept into the room, Ava sat facing the door with her back straight, hands in her lap, and head held high. She'd forgotten the striking beauty of Hara's eyes and how tall she was in person. Ava wasn't short, but Hara looked like a noble imperial, especially when next to Azuma, who slinked in and shut the door. They towered together, and Ava dug her nails into her palms. Hara kicked the other chair back and held it out for Azuma. He took it and sat down against the wall. Hara leant forward, resting her fists on the table, and ground her jaw. She had removed her Justicat breastplate and shoulder guards before getting here, revealing a jumpsuit underneath, but her bracers and thick leg guards remained firmly affixed. She must have been in a rush.
As you're probably well aware, Hara growled, your former instructor, Justice Prout, has deserted her post and murdered her teammate. The shakes returned in Ava's legs as Hara took her time finding what she wanted to say next. Eventually, she pinned Ava with a deadly stare. A while ago you were asked if Prout showed any signs of abnormal behavior. And you told the High Just, I don't think so. Now, I realize that you've only known Prout for, 2 months, roughly? But are you telling me that you never noticed her say or do anything strange?
Ava couldn't look away. Think. Being totally honest was high on her cards. Yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, 3 bags full, ma'am. But Neni hadn't. Ava cleared her throat and tried to keep her voice steady. She always seemed a little weird, ma'am, but I figured that was just her personality. She never seemed unjustly violent or... Hara thrust herself forward as if she wanted to grab Ava and shake her.
Did you have suspicions and then lie, EVA BUCK?
No! Suspect her of what? I didn't lie!
Did she ever ask you to do anything for her? Anything outside of your training?
No! Ma'am. She... Come on, say anything. Pick a singular moment. The only time she ever really seemed off was after our last session. Hara's eyes narrowed. She was close enough that Ava could smell the streaks of oil on the woman's jumpsuit, left behind by her armor. She spoke to me like it was our last goodbye, but her deployment to Earth wasn't for another 2 weeks. I just... thought she was feeling sentimental. A bitter, forced laugh escaped Hara's lips, and she straightened up.
Prout's only sentimental about one thing.
She folded her arms, sighing, and looked down at Ava with an unnerving amount of pity.
She's a convicted blood traitor. She and her brother.
The news hit Ava with a fresh headache. Neni had killed and traded Catharians, or at least supported it. How could someone so talented, so patient and understanding, be a blood trader? Flickers of light danced across her vision, the capillaries in her eyes flashed like lightning, and a whisper of static echoed inside her head. She flinched, and the sensation faded. Her brother, Ava murmured.
Her brother was a kid and not mutated, so the Justicate who caught them let the boy go. That's all she cares about, Eva. Returning to Mars, sparing blood traders in case it's her brother, or returning to her old career so she can find out what happened to him.
That couldn't be true. But then, it wasn't like Neni had ever shared any personal details. She'd never even told Ava that she suffered no side effects from the mutation. In fact, Ava didn't know if Neni watched movies, if she read anything other than Catharian romances, where she came from, or even how old she was. I had no idea, Ava said. Rumbling deep in his throat,
Azuma leant on one knee and loosened the fragments of carapace around his eyes, giving him a warped but compassionate expression. Milky skin showed between the cracks, throbbing with red veins. Ava clenched her jaw, forcing herself not to be disgusted by the pulsing blood vessels.
You are a good synth, he said. We believe you did not aid Prout. Yes, but you must tell us if she said anything that can point us to who did help her. Don't worry, we'll catch Prout in the end. Yes.
Funnily enough, Ava wasn't reassured. She stayed quiet, avoiding their eyes, pretending to reflect upon past conversations. Jesus on a zip ship. Neni used to be a blood trader. Is a blood trader. Hara growled again, growing impatient. Here's what you probably don't get, she snapped, planting her feet wide. Neni handles blood better than me, better than anyone, and I don't just mean she can throw it around like a magician. What you haven't experienced yet is being shot at by your own kind, that being synths and justicates, by the way. When you shoot blood into someone else's body, that's pretty poisonous. Imagine getting a blood transfusion with the wrong blood type. Now imagine that blood is from a new gene pool of alien-human hybrid. Rare. Volatile. Pretty darn fatal. Some think that getting shot at by a justicate or a synth is going to turn them into one. Nuh-uh, like I said. Poison. Your death is pretty much guaranteed without immediate assistance. But Neni, she can isolate any bloodshot that enters her body. I mean, I'm sure we could wear her down, but you get the point. She's lethal, and now she's out there, so I need to know the truth, Private Buck. What do you know? Clearly nothing. The woman who had spent the last few months training Ava was a blood-trading murder weapon. Who did she owe thanks to for the heads up? Pushing back her chair, Ava stood up and saluted. Hara's arms unfolded in surprise. Ma'am, I swear by everything that I am and hope to be, that I knew nothing of NENI-LOHI PROUT's plans. I never noticed anything weird about her behavior or in the things she said. Nothing that stands out. Her words washed the pity out of Hara's eyes, who twisted her brow, trying to reassess Ava's motives. Words continued to flow, and Ava felt the heat beneath her words. Ava was a goddamn soldier. She had nothing else. It was clear to me that she was having a hard time in her training, and she often seemed distracted, but she never shared anything personal. I wish I could be of more help, but this is all I can offer. I signed an oath to live and die as a synth, and I will honour that, ma'am, no matter what. Ava executed her salute and remained stood at attention, staring at the wall over Hara's shoulder. The static tingles started whispering in the back of her head again. What was that? Struth, this room was small. Smirking, Hara crossed her arms again and regarded Ava up and down. Azuma, escort Private Buck back to her quarters. Ava let herself relax, sighing with relief.
Yes.
Arkadash was pleased to see that whilst the shuttle was small and basic, it was sturdy and well-made. Modern enough to have controls he was semi-familiar with. After the initial bumpy start, he didn't take long to guess the rest of the buttons. Neither companion complained about his rusty piloting skills, because Neni was still out for the count, and Potts was too busy shivering in his seat. Shooting along at maximum velocity ate into their fuel reserves, however, and it wouldn't take Hara 5 seconds to guess their destination was Mars. Every ship this side of Earth would be patrolling the route in a few hours, just waiting to find them floating, stranded, with no fuel and a crazy ex-justice on board. When Ark judged they were a far enough distance out from the synth quarter, he cut the speed and let the ship drift with 0 thrusters. No one would come looking this close to the asteroid for a while, maybe enough time to think of a better plan than outrun the entire fleet.
They could double back, circle around the quarter until the coast was clear, then hoof it to anywhere but Mars. But that meant more fuel, and no stations. Potts flung his head back against the seat. For a while, Arkadash had thought the boy had gone to sleep, or maybe passed out. Instead, Potts breathed a huge sigh. "What did we just do?" he asked. His pitiful, resigned voice twinged Arkadash with guilt. He tried not to think of his own children getting messed up in something stupid like this before they were 20. No response seemed good enough, so he fiddled uselessly with the dashboard for a while and pretended he hadn't heard.
"What were you doing in the armory?"
Arkadash asked eventually. It was less a question and more, "I wish you hadn't been in the armory." "Trying to impress a girl," Driston said, rubbing his face with both hands as though he could scrub the evening's events off. One rumbling chuckle left Ark's chest.
"Isn't it always?" he said.
"A girl I don't even like," Driston said, misery dripping off of him. Arkadash just nodded, because alien fleets might land and asteroid cities floated in space, but puberty was a universal constant. "What about you?" the kid asked. "Trying to impress a girl?" He nodded his head back to the small bathroom compartment.
"What? No. I'm way too old for that."
Driston nodded slowly. "So what happens now?" Ark became incredibly interested in the dashboard and leant into it. "You have a plan, don't you?"
"One or two,"
Arkadash said, because now he was Captain Chelik, renegade shuttle pilot. People depended on him having a plan.
"I'm just waiting to talk them over with Neni."
Even Driston didn't seem stupid enough to believe that, and he deflated a little. "I meant for me. The longer I'm with you, the harder it will be to tell them I'm innocent." Innocent, right. Clearly this kid hadn't spent any time with the just. Maybe Neni was right. They should just leave him at the next available stop and hope he could bumble his way out of it. Driston pulled the two halves of his flex phone out of his pocket and started bashing them together in a vainer hope of reattaching them. This kid couldn't bumble his way out of a paper bag, or he wouldn't be stuck with them in the first place. Neni might have a clean conscience about dropping him, but Ark didn't. His daughter would be the same age as Driston now, maybe a little older.
"Driston,"
Arkadash said heavily,
"if you hand yourself in, they're going to put you on trial until you expire. Someone has to go down for this, and if they can't catch either of us, they'll settle for you. The drones saw you running. Best start hunting for a good lawyer now."
Driston threw the two halves of his phone into his lap. "At this point," he wailed, "which is easier? Staying with you and running from the space police forever, or just handing myself in?"
"Son, you don't actually have a choice. It's either in the shuttle or out the airlock."
The bathroom door clicked open. "I can choose for you, if you like." The humour in Neni's tone wasn't matched by her appearance. She leant heavily on the doorframe, caked in sweat, but mercifully human-shaped and unbloody. For all the time she'd mumbled about the reforming process over lunch, Arkadash had never seen it in action. In the rush to start up the shuttle, he'd only caught a glance of the inside of her skull and her clicking finger joints meshing together, and counted himself lucky. Driston shrank in his chair as Neni stumbled the short distance towards them and leant her arms on the back of Arkadash's seat. She averted her gaze from both of them, weary, out of breath.
"So,"
Arkadash said,
"that could have gone better?"
Neni's eyes hardened as she stared out of the viewport. "If your man Xing hadn't sold us out, you mean?" Even though Arkadash had seen this coming, had prepared himself for this conversation, he felt himself tense up for a fight.
"If Xing had sold us out, we would have been shot before we reached the armory,"
he said, cutting off the end of each word. Neni held up a hand, as though pushing his words away. "Okay, could have gone better if you hadn't
I don't know, stabbed me.
Oh yeah, that.
You can't just shove a knife in my throat and expect me to do the blood trick,
Nenni said, reaching up to her neck defensively, as though he were about to try it again.
It did work.
Slipped out of Ark's mouth before he could stop himself. Even Dristan slid an incredulous look his way.
Nenni finally met his gaze. No, don't you ever do that again. I'm a justicrat. The minute one of us bleeds, we're compromised, at another's mercy. You know what Hara could have done if she'd gotten a hold of my blood first?
Exactly what you did to John.
But Nenni didn't pause for his answer.
And never mind that, I almost choked to death before I knew which way was up. The shock could have killed me.
She stopped, only to draw breath, and pointed one accusing finger at Dristan.
And you, don't even get me started.
Dristan immediately scuttled out of the co-pilot's seat, waving his arms to indicate she should have it, before clambering backwards onto the rickety couch. Nenni swept into the chair without so much as a glance of thanks. She looked out of the viewport for a few minutes.
We've stopped, she said. Why are we stopping?
Drifting,
Arkadash corrected in an injured tone.
We're drifting. Half the Mars fleet is in the sky now. I thought we should hang back.
We're still near the station.
Not that near,
he said, trying to stamp out the uncertain wobble in her tone.
Hara won't try to outrun us when she can have a nice welcome party on the other end instead. Everyone knows the synth quarter is the last place you want to be, so it's the last place they'll look.
Arkadash couldn't ignore Nenni's eyebrows raise.
For now.
Nenni rested her chin in her hands.
So we don't turn up at Mars? What does she do then?
Arkadash spread his palms.
I don't know. You're the Justice. What would you do?
Nenni did not appear to like the question, and turned away, tugging one of her curls.
Then we're drifting, she said.
Well, actually, about the drifting,
Arkadash said, tapping the control panel a few times.
We're not so hot on fuel.
Dristan's mop of hair poked up from the couch. Is this going to be one of those things where we cut off life support and can't breathe properly, and then we freeze to death one by one?
No,
said Nenni and Ark together, firm. Arkadash let his shoulders sag.
That's not going to happen.
Nenni brought up a star chart on the control panel between herself and Arkadash.
We can refuel in the asteroids.
Whoa, asteroids! The sandy swirl of hair began bobbing about uncertainly. That sounds dangerous. I vote no.
There aren't any fuel stations past Mars,
Arkadash said, waving a hand at Dristan to be quiet. Nenni tapped the screen in a few places as though dredging things up from her memory.
No official stations, she said.
A secret base? Dristan hissed.
You mean blood trader outposts?
Arkadash asked.
Nenni shrugged. Among other things.
We could sell the boy in exchange.
She's joking,
Ark said loudly before Dristan could squeak in protest. He studied the map beneath Nenni's fingertips.
Sounds good in theory, but any criminal stations you can bet Hara will know them too.
She won't, Nenni said. This isn't a Justicat thing, it's a Nenni thing. Trust me?
Arkadash leant back, spreading his arms out wide.
To the mysterious asteroid field. It's not like it's the stupidest idea we've had tonight.
He reached over the back of his chair and ruffled Dristan's hair.
Hear that, Potts? We're going to be space pirates.
Dristan curled up on the couch, knees to his chest.
Yo ho ho,
he said miserably.
You're listening to Big World Network.